Get Rich Education is brought to you by International Coffee Farms. Own your very own parcel of a Panama coffee farm today.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, how's it going? You're listening to Get Rich Education, episode 30. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. It's the show where we're not just educating you, we're motivating you and providing actionable investment concepts and ideas. We're doing Vocab Rehab today, where we step back and don't just assume that you know things that most others actually don't either, and we tell you how to talk like an investor. I'm also going to tell you some things about real estate investing today that will really, upset your local real estate agent and lender, but you got to tell it like it is. Hey, first I'm proud to tell you about the launch of the Get Rich Education Android app, so now you can find us there too. Tell your Android user friends that they can now listen to GRE right from a home screen icon on their phone. All right, it was almost a year ago now, June 25th, 2014, that I made a significant sale of a basket of stocks so that I could use that money to invest in more real estate. When I sold those stocks, the S&P 500 index sat at 1,960 points, okay? 1960. That was almost a year ago now, as today is May 8th. Now, if you've listened to GRE for any amount of time, you know I'm not much of a buy, hold, and sell stock guy. The lower returns from stocks, their lack of tax advantages, their great volatility, their lack of dimensionality, meaning that you're only paid one or two ways or dimensions with stocks, rather than with investment real estate where you're paid 5 ways at the same time. That means that I typically only hold smaller positions in stocks between real estate deals. That grows my liquidity ball faster before I redeploy it into more real estate, because that's where the real lasting wealth is created. And by the way, when I want to look at a broad measure of the stock market, I don't look at how many points the Dow Jones changed in value. Points don't measure relativity like percentages do, and I look at the S&P 500 index, not so much the Dow. The S&P 500 index, that's an index of about 500 large stocks held on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. The Dow Jones Industrial Average only measures 30 publicly traded companies, and the industrial part of that name, that's largely just a throwback. The companies in the Dow today aren't traditional heavy industry companies at all. So for a good broad measure of stock market performance, look at the percent change in the S&P 500 index, not the points in the Dow. Hey, by the way, did you know that the Dow Jones is named for Charles Dow and Edward Jones? You might recognize Edward Jones as the same name of the investment advisory firms all over the US and Canada, but that's actually a different Edward Jones, not the one that the Dow Jones is named after. So, hey, getting back to my stock sale, when the S&P was at 1960, the S&P is about 2,100 points today, give or take, okay? That's a 7% gain since I sold last June 25th. Since that's a little less than a year away, let's just extrapolate and say I'll miss out on an 8% gain from June 25th of last year to June 25th of 2015. And now, to some, it appears that I lost out. My opportunity cost was 8%. But consider that I deployed the equity from that stock sale into more income-producing rental real estate in the United States and cash-flowing coffee farms in Panama. The blended rate of return from that equity deployment was about 25%, okay? So really, my opportunity cost of leaving that money tied up in stocks would have been the 25% that I actually got in the real estate minus the 8% foregone by being out of the stock market. So my opportunity cost of staying in the stock market would have been the difference between 25 and 8, or 17%. So people, unless you're perhaps an experienced stock options trader or maybe an extremely well-connected HFTer, you're not going to create wealth with stocks. And even if you are one of those things, it's precarious. That's what I need to tell people. Well, what about selecting a real estate market then, which is more important than the property? Well, your local real estate agents say it's always a good time to buy in your local market. They always say it's a good time to buy. I often hear them come up with reasons for why they say, oh, it's a good time to buy right now, and it's a good time to sell right now. And they'll say that in any economic environment within their one local market, because that's all that they serve. Well, I'm going to tell you what the problem is with your local real estate team today, okay? That's your local agent, your local property provider, your local mortgage loan officer, and maybe even your local property manager. And here's what they do. Most real estate agents, providers, and mortgage loan officers are transaction-based sales companies that operate in one market, and they try to convince you to buy in their market at all times. But the reality is that the best real estate markets change over time, and more often than not, the best real estate market is not your local one. I'll help you turn this around and develop a model that puts you first instead of the market or the property. I'm helping you develop a real estate investing strategy that enables you to diversify across markets as you build up your portfolio over time. So you ought to play by your agenda, make decisions based upon your research, what your best interests are, and not theirs and not anyone else's. You just aren't going to live an extraordinary life unless you consider real estate markets first and then teams and properties after that market is considered first. We're talking about a metro market with sustainable job drivers, sensible rent-to-value ratios, states with landlord-friendly laws, all those other things that we talk about on this show. And yeah, you might just happen to live in a geographic market where those investor advantage attributes exist. It's just not very likely. If you're in the United States, the chances that you live in or near an investor advantage market are, I'd say, maybe 20%. And then when you consider the properties within those investor advantage markets, we're talking less than 5-10% of the residential properties in the entire U.S. today that make sense for you to own as profitable rentals. It might be far less than that. And if you don't live in an investor advantage market, your agent or mortgage loan officer have zero economic incentive to want to bring up that subject. They just wouldn't want to bring up that, well, vacancy rates are 15% in your submarket. A lot of agents wouldn't even know something like that, or, they're not going to bring it to light that it might take 5 months to remove a non-paying tenant from a property in your home state. So that's why I'm hooking you up with professionals that I've had success with since I began real estate investing in 2002, and I visit a lot of real estate markets in the U.S. and outside the country. So ultimately, you don't want to build pools of cash as much as you want to build streams of income, numerous streams of income. And here's what I mean by that. And it's funny. Sometimes I listen to these traditional consumer credit financial commentators, and they all basically talk about working hard and sacrificing now so that you can maybe build a big pool of cash later that you'll have at retirement at age 60 or 70 or whatever. And then when retirees reach that age, you're all left to guess how big their pool of cash needs to be so that they can live off the income. Their key question for retirement planning is, will this pool generate enough income? That's what they're trying to guess at. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. So you're going to sacrifice now, that way you can have uncertainty later. Hey, you laugh, but that's how everyday people are thinking and acting. I'm going to sacrifice now so I can have uncertainty later. How's that sound? How about this instead? When you're young, build streams of income with the most stable, proven, and enduring asset class in Call it post-paleo human history real estate. Besides just starting the passive income streams sooner so that you're living better now, you're going to more reliably know what your income stream is in retirement so that you can also live better later. Because this way you're not trying to project what kind of stream that pool can generate. You're just building streams. You're already going to have a lot of substantial and durable income streams diversified across different U.S. and foreign real estate markets. The other thing that gets me kind of fired up really is when old-fashioned traditional consumer credit world people categorize real estate as an alternative investment. That kills me. I guess in a sense I could take that as a compliment, considering that being wealthy is sort of an alternative niche phenomenon, while investing in some lame mutual fund correlates with being lower middle class and settling for a lesser lifestyle because people think that they have to. But come on now, how is real estate an alternative? Real estate's something real. It's been around for millennia. Stocks are some paper derivatives that only represent something real. I guess some attribute stocks' history going back a few centuries to the Dutch East India Company in the 1600s when the first derivative capital stocks were conceived in Amsterdam, but that's being really kind to stocks history. Many developing countries in the world still don't even have stock exchanges today. Every nation in the world has a real estate market. Real estate is not an alternative investment. I contend that stocks are the alternative investment. They're derivatives, meaning derived from something real. Real estate is real. Well, I dedicated most of a show to comparisons between real estate and stocks in episode 4. If you like these comparisons, you'll love that show. Oh, hey, I just want to say that I hope all of the residents of the Dallas-Fort Worth area were minimally impacted from the hailstorm there recently, because it's a pretty popular investor market for real estate. And I've had a Dallas-Fort Worth provider on the show here. I talked to a couple investor friends with rental property in DFW in the last week or two. And both of my investor friends were having roofs replaced after a big hailstorm in the area. It was interesting. One of my investor friends said he's happy that he's getting a new roof in his single-family rental home for almost free, so his insurance deductible must have been pretty low. My other friend was not so lucky. His roof replacement estimate is $5,750, and his deductible is $6,500. So that's pretty rough on him. One way to increase your property's cash flow is to make your insurance deductible lower, okay, because that reduces your insurance premium. But a low deductible doesn't feel so good when you need to pay for a roof replacement after an act of God like a hailstorm. So I don't know what it is meteorologically about DFW that gives it this greater propensity toward hailstorms. So just hedge yourself by having the appropriate deductible. There's nothing wrong with the DFW investor market just because of some hail. I've never found any geographic investor market that checks every box. So, see, we bring you the good with the bad with the rental real estate here. With stocks, you don't even have insurance against loss. And in a declining stock market, you don't know where the bottom is going to be either. Real estate values never go to zero. So, hey, more when we come back. It's going to be Vocab Rehab. Through Get Rich Education and International Coffee Farms, you can own your own half-acre parcels of a passive income-generating coffee farm in Panama for as little as $12,000. It's a low-risk opportunity with an average annual return projected to be 13 to 15%. The farms are professionally managed for you on a turnkey basis, and you own the land. And you can give as well as receive by helping International Coffee Farms create good jobs that pay a living wage and provide medical, pension, and other benefits to very poor Panamanian coffee farm workers and their families, often for the first time in their lives.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Tom Wheelwright. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
About that commercial, last year I invested with International Coffee Farms myself. It's not the first outside of the U.S. real estate investment I made where I own the land, but it is my favorite. Turnkey, cash-flowing agricultural income that scales up over time as the new coffee fields mature. And, I mean, if that weren't enough, improving the lives of Panama coffee farmers. All that and still a 13 to 15% return for us projected as International Coffee Farms strategically identifies parcels to add value to with higher-end premium coffee varietals to replace the lower use that the land had provided before. For example, the old-time farmers that they've bought some of these farms from, they just don't have the financial means to provide nutrients to the soil with the best liquid fertilizer to produce the most robust coffee cherries. Well, that's where we come in. The injection of our dollars helps fund things like that. Now that International Coffee Farms owns the farm, paying us back with generous returns after the annual harvest. Now, I clearly still invest in the U.S. and will continue to. Most of my real estate's here, but it makes so much sense to have some holdings outside the U.S. I mean, to be an accumulator of real assets like real estate, which is where the real wealth is created, I mean, to say that the only place one invests real assets in is the U.S., the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world, I mean, it's becoming increasingly hard to justify with profligate U.S. monetary policy run by basically a cartel of central bankers, the Fed, whom aren't even elected officials. I mean, it's just not being very heads up or globally aware to have all of one's real asset holdings in the U.S. The U.S., for all its opportunity and its good way of life for sure, it is that greatest debtor nation in the history of the world. So it's hard to be conscious and informed and still make a decision to hold everything in just one nation. And you know, it's interesting. Some people mistakenly associate the term offshore with illegal. Well, for Americans and those in most any other listener country, it is perfectly legal to own assets offshore. It's okay. Offshore, I think it just got a negative connotation to some people because they typically only hear that word in conjunction with someone that was doing something illegally, like a headline that read that a tycoon was guilty for offshore tax evasion when he should have been reporting that to the IRS. I mean, you'll never hear a suggestion to do something remotely illegal on this show. If you're a new listener, maybe you don't know that. I mean, shoot, I'm the guy that's not only never missed a payment on my life for anything, I've never made a late payment on any account in my life. So, and you know, with creditors, if a plaintiff gets a judgment against you, I imagine that creditor is going to have a pretty difficult time repatriating foreign coffee parcel equity dollars that you have in Panama back to the United States. In that case, your capital looks pretty safe to me, but hey, ask Darren or David over at International Coffee Farms about that stuff if you care. But listen to episode 28, 2 shows ago, where I interviewed the company founder, David. At the end of the episode, he makes the kindest offer to GRE listeners any provider has ever made, knocking the price of to-be-planted half-acre coffee farm parcels from $13,000 down to $12,000. That's less than what I bought my parcels for. So, hey, you can check out their website at internationalcoffeefarms.com. Send an email to coffee@getricheducation.com for your $1,000 per parcel discount. That's like an automatic return on investment. And sending an email there doesn't obligate you to buy or do anything. International Coffee Farms will be in touch with you from there. I like to foster an environment of investing in your local real estate market only if the numbers make sense. Invest nationally too, so that you're within more than one economy, as one region's economic winds can start blowing a different direction, and having at least a stake internationally. You know, some people like to say that they think globally, but they often don't think globally or rarely act globally. You know, it's kind of funny. I bet you've done this before. I admit I have too. Do you ever buy something online And when you're filling out a shopping cart web form and you need to leave your country of residence, you're frustrated that you have to scroll through that entire list of countries and pick United States out of there. You're like, of course I live in the United States. What is this ridiculous drop down with all these countries? Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria. I need to scroll all the way down between Uruguay and Uzbekistan or whatever, and just to find the United States. Of course I live in the United States, right? I mean, people find themselves mildly irritated by that. That's a little American arrogance, right? There are 196 countries in the world today, and GRE listeners in 118 of them, by the way. So consider investing in more than one of them, especially if that one is the United States, that greatest debtor nation in the history of the world. Hey, let's do a little vocab rehab, where we go over terms that are common to investors, but they're not common to everyday people. So we're going to go ahead and define what these terms mean and give a little example and tell you why it matters to you. What about hyperinflation? You've probably heard of inflation, but hyperinflation is defined as monetary inflation at a very high rate. You could also call it the declining purchasing power of a currency at a very high rate. Some very well-respected authors and prominent commentators feel that high rates of inflation could occur down the road as world central governments keep printing and printing and printing more currency in efforts to inflate away their debt. Hyperinflation, that's an extreme though. And there's really no generally accepted number for what hyperinflation is, but I mean, it's wild. It could be hundreds of % of inflation per month. And we've seen this debasement happen throughout history for every currency, but the real hyperinflation, I mean, those are some examples like the precious metals in Roman coins being diluted with base metals, hyperinflation in Weimar Republic Germany, where currency was being raked out of city street gutters because no one wanted that paper, to what we saw more recently in Zimbabwe. I mean, hyperinflation looks crazy. That's a condition when people just want to get rid of their currency. I mean, they're like, I'll give you $50 for that hairbrush. I'll give you $450 for this old fax machine that doesn't work and no one uses it anymore because everyone just scans everything. They just want to get rid of their currency and replace it with something that might have value. We've talked a lot on this show about how real estate and real assets can be terrific hedges against inflation, and we'll continue to. The next term, leverage. That's just one of my favorite words in this entire real estate investing world. Leverage is the degree of debt financing that one uses. Anytime you take out a loan to buy a property, you have created leverage. Now, here's how it works. If you put a 20% down payment on a, say, single-family home that you live in, 20% is 1/5, so you're leveraged at a leverage ratio of 5 to 1. That means if your home appreciates 6%, that's a 30% rate of return on your down payment because you multiply your 6% rate of return by the 5 in the 5 to 1 leverage ratio. Yeah, 30%. All right, here's another example. Say you want a coastal California duplex to provide you with cash flow, but the rent-to-value ratios in that part of the world are awful. They're not investor advantage, and that is a fact. They are not. I don't buy there. So to make it produce cash flow, you have to put a 50% down payment on this duplex, for example. And that's so that you have a lower mortgage loan balance for lower mortgage payments because in coastal California, rent amounts don't keep up proportionally to real estate values. And by the way, that's not the way I do it. Putting a big down payment into a place, you're just putting more equity into this duplex in this example to buy yourself cash flow. So a 50% down payment is 1/2. That's 2 to 1 leverage. So if the duplex appreciates 6%, that's just a 12% rate of return because you used less leverage and you're only multiplying that 6% rate of return by a 2 because of the lower 2 to 1 leverage to give you that 12% rate of return. And just a reminder, leverage cuts both ways, folks. Use care. It magnifies gains in an appreciating market, and it magnifies losses in a market that's declining in value. That's why I always say that the market is more important than the property. Let's talk about title insurance for a second. I wanted to bring this up. That's the next investor term. What is title insurance? Because people buy and sell property all the time, pay $1,000 for title insurance on a transaction at closing, and yet they don't even know what it is. It's mainly a product developed and sold in U.S. real estate. So what's title insurance for, and why do you need it as a buyer? Well, it's crucial for property buyers because both you and the lender are protected from the possibility that the seller doesn't have free and clear ownership. So a title insurance policy insures against that condition. The seller can't rightfully transfer full ownership to you if there are liens on the home. If a contractor never got paid for replacing a roof on the home 3 years ago, he could have what's called a mechanic's lien against that home, which won't allow the property to transfer until that roofer is paid. A municipal taxing jurisdiction can also slap a tax lien on a non-paying homeowner for the same reason, which in that case, it would also mean that that property cannot transfer to a new owner or transfer to you in this case. In most U.S. states, the buyer is the one that pays for the title insurance. You're typically going to see that on the settlement statement at closing. Let's just do one more vocab rehab term. Let's bring up value. I mean, value is really such a simple term, but how do we really think of value in real estate investing? And I've always liked the acronym DUST, D-U-S-T, to describe value. That's demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Demand being the desire for possession backed by financial means to satisfy that need. Having the finances to reinforce that desire to own something is important. That's real demand. I mean, economists talk about supply demand as economics 101, but it's really supply with demand accompanied by the capacity to pay behind that demand. The U in DUST is for utility. That's the capacity to satisfy human needs and desires, basically. If you buy a fourplex in Philadelphia near trolley lines and no one owns cars, then garages might go largely unused because there's no utility for them there. The S is for scarcity. Scarcity that's a finite and limited supply of something, and it's certainly a contributor to value. The last contributor to value in our DUST acronym is transferability. That's the relative ease with which ownership rights can be transferred. So you can have the first three letters in DUST. You can have demand, utility, and scarcity. But if you don't have transferability, which is sort of like liquidity, well, that asset is of diminished value. And one thing that might impede transferability are existing liens on a property which were discovered as a result of title insurance, just to tie a couple terms together. Hey, I've got one more thought about value. Okay, here's a question for you. Is value created by how much it costs to produce something? Or is an item valued by the benefit that the buyer receives by possessing it? Put another way, what's the main driver of value with real assets? Is it how much it costs to make it? Or is it the amount of benefit that it provides to a buyer? I would contend that it's the latter. It's not the cost required to produce something. It's the amount of benefit that it provides the owner or buyer. That's where the real value is. Imagine a 10-unit apartment building that's worth $500K. But then a new Tesla manufacturing plant and a new interstate highway exit is built 1/10 of a mile from it. Well, then 2 years later, the apartment building is worth $700K. That's a 40% gain. Well, it didn't cost 40% more to construct the building 10 years ago. It has more value because the rents are higher because people value living in that more preferable location now with access to transportation and their job. When you sell a property, the sale price, it won't be a function of the cost to construct it or the cost that you bought it for years ago either. It's going to be a function of its value today. So that's really the concept of value. And hey, that's Vocab Rehab. I hope today was insightful. For next week, I'm going to talk about a lot of thought-provoking topics with investment real estate, including what's going to happen to the value of your U.S. real estate when mortgage interest rates rise? What's going to happen to rents when mortgage interest rates rise? Also, I'm going to talk about what's the value of a college education versus the value of a get-rich education. That ought to be fun. I've got way more than that for you too. Hey, please tell a friend or family member to check out Get Rich Education. Since you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, if you make those people better, it's going to make you better too. Since I spread my ideas to friends, many of them have taken up investing and I've benefited. It gives us collectively all kinds of advantages as we share information amongst each other about who the best property managers are and where the best markets are, who's getting the best returns and where they're getting them from, how we can learn from each other's problems. I mean, peeps, like if you value your friends as friends, you will share ideas with them, because if you don't, you are pretty likely to separate yourself financially from them over time. And whether it's right or not, when people stratify themselves in a socioeconomically distinct way from each other, they start to drift apart. They will grow apart. Their interests change because their economic means are different. So if you respect your friends as friends, help pull them up and they'll be right there with you and they'll help you. Some aren't going to come along, some will. Like I've said before, if you share your candle's flame, if you share that light with someone else's candle, it doesn't diminish your flame one bit. And remember to tell your Android user friends and family that it's easier than ever to listen to Get Rich Education every Friday, because there's an Android app for that at Google Play. This way we'll have more people than ever that can go out there and not quit their daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.